Hey everybody, it's Alan from Woodcrest Bonsai. Today I'm going to work on two different windswept trees. And they depict conditions that are a little bit different. This tree here is a carissa grandiflora. Produces a really pretty white flower that's also very fragrant, which is reminiscent of Confederate jasmine. And that's because they're closely related to jasmine, not true jasmine. Confederate jasmine is not, quote unquote, a true jasmine. So, as bonsai, they don't produce a lot of flowers because, of course, you're always pinching. This one here needs some work on pinching. But this tree depicts a tree that fell over completely. The whole trunk fell over, and it's still being buffeted by the wind. So, it's much more prostrate and angled, even almost sort of semi-cascade. This is a portulacaria jade, and obviously this depicts a tree that was able to remain upright but is still being buffeted by the wind, and it needs some maintenance for one thing. So where should I start? Let's start with the jade. Okay, here we are. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. Maybe I should do this. Go like this and then bring it up like that so we can see more of the trunk. So there are some things. I'm going to remove all the wire today too. Even though I don't really see it cutting into the bark, I'm still going to remove it. You can always rewire. But there are some things that are obvious that need to be cut. And now all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, maybe I could just wire that guy and he could add to the look of the windswept. So maybe I'll leave him. But all this little stuff right here, all this little stuff all right here, has nothing to do with the windswept design, and there's no way to really get these guys into the design. And all this little, growth from adventitious buds is just a part of the way the tree grows. If you manipulate a tree like this, it may sprout down like this. That's perfectly normal. But it's something that I certainly don't want as far as the design of the tree. That guy's actually got a little bit of a nub. Yeah, I left a little nub there. So maybe we'll leave him just sort of just being pushed by the wind, but still. Okay. And then it's mostly the maintenance is just trimming off the growing tips. Like I said, I may leave this guy. I may leave this one and wire it into place. And I'm taking the wire off now, and I probably won't rewire it. I'm just going to let it rest, and see how well it's set. If it reverts back where the branches, spring back to where they used to be. Because this tree could have very easily been an informal upright. I could have taken some of this growth here and brought it around like this into there. And it could have been a very interesting informal upright. However, I decided to make it a windswept. And I unwind my wire. So that process is, it's fairly tedious, but not that big of a deal. I move the tree closer to the edge of the bench so I can actually get over here. Maybe we need to move the tripod even a little more. Trying to get the whole tree in the frame. Okay. So now, just begin removing the wire. And I featured this tree on another video that you can watch, like right there. And Windswept is a style that I don't do a lot of. But they can be interesting. See that guy, he's barely attached. Could have very easily had the trunk snapped right there. But as long as there's still some cambium attached, it will probably continue to grow. And this tree may have a few too many branches. So that's another part of today's assessment. Do I need to remove any branches? And if so, which ones? And I always remove the thinnest branches first. The thinnest wire, which of course is attached to the thinnest branches. So it's pretty obvious if you watch any of my videos, I don't use a script. In fact, sometimes I'll just totally space out on what I'm trying to say, and there's this awkward silence where I'm thinking, what am I thinking of? But that's all right. I guess I'm never going to be hip, sleek, and cool. But hopefully the quality of my trees will keep you coming back. And there's a rule in wiring that says wire everything, and I think I was pretty good about that on this tree. Yep, he fell off. So portulacaria is a very versatile plant. One of my best choices for beginners. And the versatility is not necessarily the reason why. It's its ability to forgive you if you let it dry out. As a beginner, I found it difficult to keep things watered because bonsai need a lot of care, and of course the rewards are tremendous if you do give them that kind of care. But in the beginning it was, it's a learning process. So because portulacarias are succulent and they store water in their tissues, if they get a little too dry, it's really of no consequence. They'll be fine. Whereas other plants, and I could start shooting off a list of so many different trees that are not very drought tolerant. Some trees, if they dry up even once, that's it, they're gone. So that makes it pretty tough on a beginner to, be very enthusiastic about the hobby and then have trees begin to die from lack of water. And I'm just trying to share my own experience too. I find it an interesting analogy that I've heard growing bonsai is like taking care of a prize dog. Would you leave your dog with no food for a week? Of course, people would be like, "What? No way!" And so it's that same kind of care that bonsai need. In fact, as you become more involved in the hobby, you will begin to see your trees as pets. Even, and I dare say this, as your children. Especially if your real children are grown and gone, and live 2,000 miles away. And many people would just snip this stuff off and throw it all away. But I find there's a certain amount of meditation involved in removing wire, just the same as it is applying it. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm attempting to straighten the wire out. Fairly straight. Trying to figure out where to go next. Where are the birds today? No birds or frogs. Like I said, last night was the first night in 5. We had 4 days of pretty heavy rain, which is, thank God, because it was so dry. And then last night it rained throughout the state of Florida. It just didn't get to us. And the afternoon thunderstorms that Florida is renowned for in the summertime, summertime afternoon thunderstorms, they're pretty hit and miss. There can be times when thunderstorm coverage is pretty extensive and everybody gets rain. But typically a storm is just a sort of a localized event, and it comes and goes. The other day, 2 days ago, we had a very early storm about 1 in the afternoon, and it just came down, thunderous, heavy rain, and then it cleared up, and it was beautiful, clear sky, sun was shining, and that is not uncommon. I'm from Chicago, and when it rained in Chicago, it probably was going to rain for the next 24 hours, because just kind of that dreary kind of rain. But the Florida thunderstorms can come and go very quickly. And then depending on conditions, you can get another storm to come 2 or 3 hours later. Typically though, the mornings are beautiful. Like right now, it's just bright sky, bright sun, calm wind, and then the storms begin to form. About 2 or 3, and then they usually hit about 4 or 5, and of course that is always changeable. Got 3 or 4 of them here that I don't know how to get them off of there. And I am not the world's perfect wirer, that's for sure. I know they've actually had wiring contests, and I didn't win. Well, I didn't enter. And my wiring philosophy is that functionality over form. It don't need to be purdy. If you're getting the branches to set where you want them, and the only exception to that is if you're going to display a tree with wire on it, then you want the wire to be as aesthetically pleasing as you can get it. Especially if it's a judge show, because judges frown on crummy wiring jobs. But sometimes you can see Japanese shows where trees have massive amounts of wire and they're in the display. Normally you try to wire a tree for the future. So I'm just sort of looking at this guy from above. But from what I'm seeing, the vast majority of branches have set into place quite nicely. So as I'm removing this wire, the windswept form is still quite apparent. I don't really see a tremendous amount of branches springing back. So the wiring has definitely done its job. And bonsai is always a work in progress. You know, a finished tree that you see in a display, that is a tree that's been tweaked to go into the display, been totally cleaned up and trimmed so that every leaf is in place and every branch is in place, and you know, the soil has no weeds and nice moss and a clean pot and, you know, blah blah blah. But that's not everyday bonsai. I kind of liken it to, if we're going to anthropomorphize, kind of like you and your significant other go into a fancy event, right? So the man actually takes a shower, and the woman pays $100 to get her hair done, and you put your tux on, and she puts on her finest dress, and as you walk arm in arm into the venue, everyone's like, whoa, look at them. But let's put it this way, I'm not wearing a tux right now. So that's only, you know, every now and then. And it's the same with your bonsai trees. John Naka, who was considered the foremost American bonsai artist, he told the story many times of people coming to his house to see his collection and they being dismayed that the trees weren't all in perfect show condition. And he used to say that it's impossible to keep all your trees in perfect show condition. For one thing, you can literally kill them if you're constantly forcing them into show quality condition. They need to grow. They need to be a little leggy. They need to have a little bit of you know, excess branching or whatever. So since I'm lazy, I took that to heart. All right. So I've now come to the thicker wire, And none of this wire is massively thick because the tree didn't need it. That's one thing I try to avoid more than anything, is over wiring, using wire that's way too thick for the branch you're trying to bend. Because you could damage the branch. It's not any more efficient. I use wire that's just strong enough to hold the branch into place. Any stronger and you're not going to be any more efficient. And in fact, if you make a mistake, you can actually damage the branch you're trying to wire. And if you're new and wiring seems daunting, well, welcome to Bonsai. None of us took up wiring like, oh yeah, no problem. We all looked at it like, oh God, can I do this? And there's another bonsai artist in England, Dan Barton, and he has a website. Not a website, a YouTube channel. And he's doing a lot of ceramics now. He's doing a lot more pottery. And he's got some very interesting pottery techniques. But anyway, many years ago, he was a visiting artist, and he came to our club. And he told the story where, a beginner will take a beginner's class, and they'll have a tree that's a big bush with far more branching and foliage than it needs to be a bonsai. And so, of course, the first thing you do is you cut off all that excess stuff. And the beginners are, some beginners, they're like in shock. It's like, oh my God, you cut that much off? And then it's time to wire. And about halfway through, those very same beginners will say, can we cut more off? Because the wiring can be very tedious. There's no question about that. And I'm straightening out the wire as we speak. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't, sometimes I wait. But it's far easier to just straighten it out. It doesn't need to be perfect. It'll still work. And we only got one more. There's our branch, our very weak branch. And I like to have the branch that I'm unwiring facing me just the same as when I put the wire on. It's so much easier to have the branch facing you. In both wiring and removal. And there's a lot of leggy growth like this guy right here. I mean, just that one little tiny piece of foliage at the very end. But for a windswept, that is not necessarily detrimental. Coming to the finish line. There we go. How are we doing? Okay, I would say that for the vast majority of it, it's held in place pretty well. The apex kind of sprung back, And like I said, we could take this guy here, this branch here, and bring it this way, and boom, you've got an informal upright. So there is certainly some reversion here, especially because the wire twisted the trunk, and now the trunk is sprung back. But I think overall, the wire did its job. It still looks like a windswept tree. And now I'm just going to trim it back, make it a little bit tighter. Still not quite sure what to do with that guy. And here's another piece of growth that has really developed much more vigorously than everything else. You know, these guys here need to be wired back into place. But for now, I think I'm just going to let it grow. Cutting these tips off like this helps get it denser and thicker. But I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, this one here really is out of place. It's like, whoa. You know, I don't see it here in eyeball, but in the camera it looks like it's shooting straight back down into the soil. And of course we could take our clippers and just snip them and it'd be gone. So there's number one. The second one here is a carissa, and it needs the same treatment. It needs a certain amount of trimming on the ends of the branches. And we've had a little bit of die off here. We see there's some dead right here. There's some dead right here. And there's some other places that are dead. And carissa can be fairly temperamental. No doubt about that. So now I'm just taking off the dead parts. And as far as the windswept design is concerned, we almost have two parallel branches right here, but we don't need any of this here. So, you know, I like to, since I read from left to right, I like my trees to flow from left to right. Still finding more dead. So this stuff here, so I want my trees to move this way. This stuff here can just come off completely because none of it, in fact, it's detracting from the windswept. There we go. And then we have this guy here, which I'm just going to shorten tremendously. And you notice this top branch never got any wires, so in the next wiring I can do it like that, and then even bring this guy like this. And I left this kind of long and leggy just to see. Okay, so now unwire. Don't have to worry about that branch. Oh, there's a whole bunch more dead on this thing. Okay. And many times I use the same wire to wire two branches, so I hook it around the trunk a couple times and then take it up to one branch and then take the other end up to another branch. And that can create a little bit of confusion when you're trying to remove it, because they can get caught up with other wire. Okay. This tree really has much less wire on it than the port. I said the rule when you're wiring is wire everything. Well, I certainly didn't follow it with this guy. I really just wired most of the main branches. Which means that taking the wire off will be less tedious and take less time. And you can see some of this wire now looks silver, which just means that it's incredibly old. Because modern wire that's used for bonsai is mostly copper-coated aluminum. And when the copper coating gets worn off, you're left with the gaudiness of the aluminum. As far as functionality, it's still wire, it still works. The traditional wire is copper. And copper is interesting stuff because if it's heated, and it has to be fairly high temperatures, like 700 degrees Fahrenheit, I think, something like that. And then it gets what's called annealed, which makes it very soft. And then what happens is as you begin to wire it around the branch, the molecular structure of the copper changes back and it becomes much harder, which helps with keeping branches into place, but it also makes it virtually impossible to unravel copper wire. So copper wire is the traditional wire, and a lot of people still use it, but it has to be annealed. And I think you can actually buy copper wire that has been annealed. And once again, the positive part of that is that the wire is much softer, easier to bend, and then probably more importantly, it hardens as you're wrapping it around the branch, so that it's much more durable as far as keeping the branch in place. And for that reason, typically you need thinner wire if you're using copper, because it's stronger than aluminum. But it is unusable, unreusable. You cannot unravel copper wire once it's hardened. So the vast majority of us that still do use wire use copper-coated aluminum. And since I save a lot of my wire, the copper coating can get rubbed off. So we've got, well, I'll show you my pile, and you can see for yourself. Is that it? No, there's one more chunker right here. I just got my water bill, and I used, oh man, 3 or 4 times as much water as I normally do. And that was from watering my bonsai. And that was for, what was April? Was it April? The bills are usually like a month behind. However, they also give you last month, how much you used, and how much you used last year. And sure enough, I used the exact same amount last April because it was also incredibly dry. So I found that a little comical. Okay, I do believe that that is all the wire on this guy. And he stayed in place pretty well. We got, is that dead? It's not dead because see there's green all the way to the tip. Do I need it though? Do I really even need it? I don't think I do. Just going to take that off. You know, we've got kind of like a slant like this, so just take him off to about there. And I think this back growth here can all be shortened. Shorten this guy tremendously. Like this guy comes from way down here. We could probably just take him off completely and no one would even know. And then shorten some of the tips. And there's still more dead. Okay, so there we go. Two windswept trees, unwired, and I think I will give them some fertilizer. And I may give them a rest as far as wiring goes. Let them just grow. Try to keep an eye on them. Like if something crazy, like this little stuff here that I took off, if that begins again, you know, remove that. If we get some crazy elongation in here, that can get removed. So that's it for this video. A carissa and a portulacaria jade. The jade depicts a tree that is capable of growing upright but then being pushed by the wind, and the carissa depicts a tree that the wind was so strong at some point in the tree's life that the entire tree fell over. So there you go. And an incredibly boring 30 minutes of taking wire off. Oh, I was going to show you the wire too. This is more of a goof than anything. But here we go. As you can see, these really bright silver ones, that's just simply the copper coating missing on aluminum wire. It's all aluminum wire. They coat it with copper just to make it purty, because the aluminum wire is pretty gaudy. But if it's your own collection, and you would never show a tree with aluminum wire like that, especially if you were attempting to win a prize or something. But it works for me, so I'm a saver. I grew up with 2 Depression era parents, so saving is just part of my DNA. So, thanks for watching. I think the next time I wire these guys, I'll treat you to that. And so, stay tuned for the update on this and every tree that I'm growing, that I'm trying to grow. And I will see you in the next video.